Welcome to the Phoenix Rising podcast, journeys of descending into the mysteries and rising from the roots. I am your host, Lisa Hillier, and today we have a solo episode, my first solo episode. And so, on the anniversary of my sobriety, I am sharing with you my sober journey, what took me from the depths of darkness into a sober path that I now lead. So, can't wait to share with you. Hey, welcome. My first solo episode, and I am really excited to share with you my sober journey. Today is the anniversary. It's my 6 years of sobriety, the anniversary of when I decided to finally give up alcohol. And so, to begin, I'm going to share a little bit about my journey with alcohol and what that looked like, and those pivotal moments where, the goddess kind of brought me to my knees, where I decided that alcohol couldn't be a part of my life any longer. And really the fears that came along with that, right? Because when we're making such a huge decision, we're really stepping into the unknown, and who's going to meet us on the other side, what that person is going to look like, who will look like without the substance, is really stepping into the unknown. And it really takes a leap of faith, of trust, of surrender, and it can be terrifying. And it's part of what held me back for years of not giving up the alcohol that I knew I needed to give up, but who would meet me on the other side? Who would I be without it? And so I'm excited to dive in, and wherever you're at on your journey, if you're sober, if you're knowing that maybe the substance isn't the best for you anymore, but scared to take the leap, I honor and see you, and just know you're not alone on that path. And so, if you're sober curious, all the facets of, where we are on our journeys, it's all beautiful and perfect. And I'm honoring you and just witnessing you in that. And so where my journey began, I grew up in a small town in northern Alberta, Canada, very close to the Northwest Territories. It was extremely cold. And if I could describe the town with anything, it was very extreme, very extreme cold winters where not a lot of daylight, and very hot, intense summers with not a lot of nighttime. So it was kind of always the teetering of the scales in the town of high level. And so, childhood was very much, or my teenage years was very much going to the bar, drinking, partying all night, parties at the dugout, that kind of stuff. And what started to happen at a young age is I was holding on to some childhood trauma that was wanting to come to the surface, but was repressed and not dealt with. And so around the age of 13, 14, I didn't know how to deal with the trauma that I had experienced. It wasn't communicated. It wasn't vocalized. It was very much kept repressed and within. And, how we often deal with, or, in my experience and with the work that I do, how a lot of people deal with trauma, they Band-Aid it. They don't know how to express the emotions or process the emotions. And so they start to mask the emotions. And I started masking with alcohol, because that was really what we did in this town that I grew up with. And so through my teenage years, a lot of drinking. I, oftentimes blackout drunk, wild parties. It was just what we did and what I did. And I can look back at a picture of myself around that age, and just seeing the light start to dim in my eyes. And, so masking the trauma that my parents divorced, and then that brought on a whole bunch of other emotions that I didn't deal with. And so what was really happening on the inside was there was an internal hell that I was experiencing and didn't know how to process. I went from shrink to shrink to shrink, but, or, counselor to counselor to counselor, therapist, but I wasn't open to start to actually deal with what was going on in the inside. So I masked, I numbed. It was my escape, alcohol, sex. That was my way to numb out and seek validation that I was really wanting within. But at that time, I didn't know that that was my true desires. And so, I remember being drunk at home one night, looking out the window and just aching and begging somebody to come and rescue me from this internal hell that I was experiencing. And that was really what my teenage years looked like. And then I, moved out of my hometown, went to Red Deer, and really started a different kind of life and ended up becoming pregnant with my daughter. And that was the first time that I had something on my own. It was like, I can throw myself into this. And whereas, alcohol was my escape mechanism, my daughter was like, it was something outside of myself that needed me, and that I could really show up for. And so with, becoming pregnant, I cleaned up, I got my act together, we'll say, and dove into into being a mom and having this beautiful baby. And, that connection, that relationship was what really saved me for many years. And a year after my daughter was born, my dad died in a plane crash. And that didn't send me back into the depths of alcohol. What it did do, however, was I can only ever explain it as I was a balloon that had been let go. And so I went numb, and there was no substance that brought on the numbness this time. Kind of in my teenage years, alcohol was my numbing mechanism. But with this, I was just numb in life. And so with that, the crumbling of the relationship with my daughter's dad and eventually I decided to go into design school to become an interior designer, threw myself into that. And so through those years, that was really, a large chunk of my 20s. Alcohol was still in my life, but I was so just really consumed by design school, by being a single mother. I didn't have a lot of time on my hands. I didn't have a lot of space. And so alcohol was there, but not to the depths that it was in my teenage years. And so during design school, I was diagnosed with an anxiety. There was so much being dealt with my father's estate, being a single mom, going to design school, staying up all night. I was really juggling a lot of balls. And when design school ended, when I finished, it was almost like I just crumbled. I crumbled. It was like I was holding my breath through all of those years from when my dad died until, I finished design school. It was like I finally exhaled. And with that, a crumble took place and I entered the corporate world. I was living in Calgary and I went wild. Alcohol very much became a part of my life again. And that internal hell that I'd been repressing from childhood was very much there and alive. And it had deeply intensified, right? It's like anything that we're repressing, it just grows and grows and grows and kind of, creates this like volcano within our bodies, and it has to erupt. And when it would erupt was when I was drinking, right? Because then that's when I can let the emotions out. That's when I can really feel the freedom that I was seeking and didn't feel when I was sober, right? I didn't have the tools to express my emotions, to process my emotions, to be with who I actually was. I didn't even have a clue who I was at that time in my life. And so the only time that I would feel freedom was when I was drunk. And, it's such a false freedom. It is not actual freedom, but that was my experience of freedom at that time. That's what I thought it was. And so countless times, or I mean, so many times of blackout drunk, really unsafe situations that I put myself in, a lot of shame and guilt of things that I did when I was drunk. And through those years, it just intensified. And then I came into a relationship that was extremely toxic and mentally abusive. And, with that relationship, I want to be clear that he was not the only abuser in it. I was very much extremely toxic and abusive as well. And so we were complete mirrors to each other. And often in the personal development world, we talk a lot about the mirrors and how relationship can be a mirror, how different people are mirrors to ourselves. And I believe that is truth in some instances, not in every instance, but this man was literally my mirror. And we just ripped each other's heart out over and over and over again. And it was a highly volatile relationship where the alcohol just became, it was just such a core part and of the relationship that sent me into the depths of darkness like I'd never been before. And he was such a teacher. And, I can look back now at that time in my life and see it as what needed to happen. But when I was in it, I mean, it was terrifying. It was soul crushing. It was rock bottom, definitely rock bottom. And why he was such a teacher looking back was that he was showing me. And I would have core people in my life tell me, like, Lisa, he hates you. He hates you. Like, it was like me as this fun, loving human was gone. She had completely left the building and I was walking on eggshells, right? Like, he watched every move I made. I was not me. I was not there anymore. And so, they were like, Lisa, he hates you, because there was such jealousy and, just, there was no love there. There was no love. And so he hated me, but I hated myself. And he was showing me that. And that relationship really broke me down into a place that I had never been before and have never been since, thankfully. And that's when alcohol brought out the absolute worst in me and became extremely destructive. And so, went through that relationship. And then I was moving to Australia for a career opportunity in the design world. And he was meant to come with me. And right before we were to leave, it was just like, we both knew like, we cannot move across the world together. We will literally kill each other. And we were killing each other through that whole relationship anyway, but it would have been an actual death, or, we were just so toxic. And so I ended that relationship right before moving to Australia, and me and my daughter moved to Australia for this career opportunity. And I think I thought that everything would change, my relationship with alcohol, the pain that I was masking. I thought it would all change when I moved to Australia. And, that's an illusion. We think that we can run away from our pain, or that we can mask our pain. And, alcohol masks the pain. There's so many different ways that we mask what is actually going on the inside. Alcohol being my chosen substance, but we think that we can run away or escape our pain, but we never can. We never, ever can until we actually go into it. And so when I moved to Australia, I thought everything would be great. I thought it would be a new start, new beginning. Here we go. And everything just followed me there and really broke me down even farther. I had always dreamed of moving to Australia, and here my dream had come true, and I was ruining it. I was so ruining it. And I was drinking by myself all the time and just in darkness, very much in darkness. And I came to a point, and I don't know the exact point, but it was just like, you are ruining this for yourself. This is all you've ever wanted. Your life is crumbling all around you. You're going to hurt yourself. And something has to change. Like, you have to be here. Like, it was like I was always escaping, and the alcohol was, creating that for me, this escapism. But it just was this moment where I was like, this is all you've ever wanted, and you're just ruining it. You're ruining it, and you're dying in it. Like, you're dying on the inside, or you've been dead on the inside for a really long time. And I would say I'd been dead on the inside, from my teenage years. There was moments, of course, but always kind of dying and drowning in the alcohol. And so I made a choice when I was in Australia. And so me and my dear friend that also lived there, and we worked together, she was the one who got me the job in the design firm. We tried out for a dragon boating team, and we went to yoga, and we could only choose one. And we chose yoga, and I threw myself into yoga. So I have a very, I don't even know if I would call it addictive anymore, but at that time I had a very addictive personality where I would throw myself into things, throw myself into the alcohol, throw myself into being a mother, throw myself into design school. And so you can see in some ways it serves me, in other ways it doesn't. And so I threw myself into yoga, and that was in 2012. And so yoga was really the catalyst of my sobriety journey. However, alcohol still stayed in my life as I navigated this new spiritual path. And so threw myself into yoga. I stayed in Australia a little while longer, and then eventually moved back to Canada and kept going, diving deeper and deeper into personal development. When I arrived back in Canada, I hired a life coach and started working with her, and went back into the design world, but knew that the design world didn't fit anymore. Something was out of alignment. And so when I, was navigating this path, this new spiritual path, still in the design world, still drinking, what would happen is I would, really move forward on my spiritual path and then get drunk. And it would take me back like 100 steps, however many steps it was. But I would wake up, and that was really, when I'd have my sessions with my life coach, and it was just like the shame and the guilt and like, what the fuck did I do last night? Like, what did I say? Just all of the shame and guilt that comes after you've gotten blackout drunk and don't know what the frick you did the night before, right? Like, that is probably the worst feeling in the world. In my experience, that's one of the worst feelings, is just like, oh, what did I do? Am I safe? Am I okay? And just kind of like creeping back out from underneath the covers. And so that would happen, and the drinking would become less and less consistent. I wasn't drunk all the time. I wasn't drinking every weekend. It would maybe be like, once or twice a month. But, looking back, what started to happen is, when we're on our spiritual path, we're opening ourselves, right? And so from teenage years, or probably earlier, up until 2012, which I was in my early 30s, I had been a very closed person, completely closed off. My heart was not open. There were walls, like bulletproof walls built up around it. But the spiritual path, or the yoga path, starts to break down those walls, and it opens you in a really beautiful way. But you also become very, like attuned to energies. Okay. And so I'm an empath. I feel other people's energies. A lot of us are. And why we sometimes use substance is because the energies are too intense. Like looking back, when I'm in a room of people, I felt very uncomfortable, very awkward. I don't belong. And so I would drink, you know, and so the more you're on this yoga path or spiritual path, you're opening and opening yourself more to energy. So that would intensify, because when I'm in these, large groups of people, it was like, whoa, like this is too much. And so I would drink more and more. I would consume more. And so my spiritual path I was on it. It was guiding me into beautiful spaces. But when I would drink, it was almost like I would go farther into the depths of darkness, because energetically I was opening myself. And I don't know when it was, but I came across this article about how when we're blackout drunk, essentially like our body is too toxic for our soul. And so our soul leaves the building, our body, and that gives, we become an empty host for other entities to come in, And so you can see that when you look into somebody's eyes and they're blackout drunk, it's like nobody's home. But who is home? It's not that person, And so looking back, I can see how I was more and more susceptible to that, where other entities were essentially coming into my body and taking the lead, which that's terrifying, right? Because we do stupid shit when, you're under the influence of something. And so, that was happening, where the dives into the darkness, alcohol kind of taking me in, were really intense and not safe and kind of terrifying in a way. And so looking back, I see that. But so the spiritual path, moving forward on it, the drinking less and less. But when I did drink, it could be quite damaging. Okay. So it would take me back on my path. And, I think it was 2014. I was well on my spiritual path at that time. And I fell in a fire, and the skin on my left arm was hanging off my body. Like, I was in emergency, wasted. And, my left arm got all bandaged up. I went home and I was at my sister's and started drinking again. Like, it was like it had just captured me and was keeping me and holding me bound, where it just swept me into its like darkness. And, falling in a fire, thank God there was a man there and he grabbed me, otherwise I was going full on in, and it just got my arm. But that's terrifying reflecting back. But the first thing I did when I got home from the hospital was start drinking again. And so I was just wallowing in the depths of the alcohol. And I mean, that was a wake up call. That was a moment where I was like, probably the week or two after, there'd been key moments through those years where I was like, it's time, like you have to give this up. But I was so consumed with wanting to be a normal drunk. And alcohol is so normalized in our society, and this was over 6 years ago, but, to be the person at the table that's not drinking, that's sober, that felt terrifying to me, because if I were to, sit with a sober person, my first thought would be, well, what's wrong with them? Why can't they handle alcohol? And that's the narrative. Maybe it's only for myself, but I see that in society where it's like, that's just what you do. That's what we did growing up. That's what you do at Christmas holidays. That's what you do at birthdays. Alcohol is so interwoven throughout our society. And, looking back now, I can see it's a way to keep society bound, because alcohol does take us away from our truth. It used to be medicine, it was a carrier for the tinctures or the herbs and stuff, and it still is. But anything that is overconsumed to the point that our society consumes it, it's toxic, And so I was in this inner war with myself, where it was like, I knew I had to give it up. Friends would tell me like, come on, Lise, like it's time. But I was so consumed with just being a normal drunk and trying to be able to handle alcohol. And I would be very like calculated. I would be very calculated while I was drinking, where it was like, okay, I have this drink. I can have the next one in, let's say, half an hour. And even when I'm drinking the drink, I'm not really aware, or, I'm not being with the drink, which, sounds weird. I was so preoccupied with when I could have my next drink and my next drink. And okay, like I was so consumed with trying to have awareness of when it was enough, but I didn't, and so many people don't know when enough is enough. They just keep going and keep going and keep going. And I was trying to have that edge where I knew where enough was enough, and it just never came. And so this inner war continued for a couple more years for sure, where I knew I needed to give it up, but I was terrified of who I would be without it. Everybody knew me as a party girl. I was really fun sometimes when I was drunk. Sometimes I was really not fun. Probably in those later years, I was not fun, since that relationship, the fun was gone for sure. But I didn't know who I would be. It was like taking off a mask that I had worn my whole life. And that's terrifying, to be like, who is on the other side of that? And, especially when alcohol is such a mask that almost everybody wears, not everybody, but I mean, it's very prevalent in our society. And so who would I be without the booze? Held me back until, I went traveling in 2015. I left to go to India to do a yoga teacher training before. So still very, very consumed with my yoga path, still head on into personal development at that time. And so I was going to India for my yoga teacher training and spending 6 weeks there. But before then, I went traveling for almost 4 months throughout the UK and Europe. And also I went into Israel and Jordan. And so I was traveling for a couple months. And during that time, I mean, I had a great time. I have to say, I had a beautiful time traveling, going to hostels, just really living a different lifestyle that I'd always dreamed of. But I drank the whole time, and I was very calculated. I was almost like a functioning alcoholic during that time when I was overseas, because I was so like, okay, you can have your first drink at this time. You can have your last drink at this time, because I knew I was staying in these hostels. I was by myself. I wanted to stay safe and have that awareness with me. But I very much was, drinking every day through those travels. And sometimes, went a little bit wild, but I was oftentimes with people that I felt safe with. And so I was traveling at that time. And then I went to India, and I had decided before I went to India that alcohol was not going to be a part of that trip, because I was doing my yoga teacher training, and we had one beer. I remember having one beer, and that was it. And I was like, oh my God, like this feels amazing. And throughout my life, I had quit for small chunks of time, like 40 days. I would quit for 40 days, but take it right back up. Or, I would be like, I'm quitting forever. And forever felt so huge. So I wouldn't do it. And then I was like, oh, I'm a failure. I can't do this. That had happened a few times throughout my life up until that point. But so when I was in India, barely drank, and that felt amazing. But what I noticed when I left India was that like heightened awareness of other people's energy. And it really, really became intense when I left India. And so I left India, I went back to Spain, met up with a friend in Israel, and we rented a car and drove around Israel. And I was terrified. I was terrified. There might've been some past life stuff coming up there. I don't know. And so I would say to him, like, if you could just pretty much give me a bottle of wine and a straw, that would, be best for both of us, because I just wanted to be drunk the whole time, because it was like I could not handle the anxiety that I was feeling, the intensity that I was feeling. It all became so overwhelming, which was so perplexing, because I had just spent this time in India doing yoga. Um, but I was also extremely open to other people's energies, to other things. And so, when I was traveling through Israel and then Jordan, and the alcohol was just really intense. And it felt like I just had to be drunk all the time to handle and cope with life. And I, so left Israel, went back to London, drank the whole flight home from Israel to London. Um, yeah, these fears were intensifying. And then I was back in England. My mom and my daughter met me there for Christmas, and we spent it with our family over there. And the alcohol was just like so much that I had a session with one of my coaches right before I was to return home from England back to Canada. And she was just like, there was things coming up that were interesting. It was really a moment where the universe was like, this has got to stop. Like, this has got to stop. I'd woken up New Year's Day. What the frick happened? Death was knocking on my door. And it was right after that I had this session with my life coach. And she was just like, the universe is bringing you to your knees where you really don't have a choice. Because if you want to follow this spiritual path, and I had trained as a life coach during my travels, I would yoga teacher training. I knew that was my path. If you want to continue following this path, alcohol cannot be part of it, because it was like the more I opened and opened and opened, which that's so beautiful, right? To be open and expansive on this planet. That's what we came here to do. But that was like almost like the doors were open for the alcohol to take me into the deepest, darkest places I'd ever experienced. And that's not a safe place to go into that deep darkness with alcohol or with a substance. We go into it through the work, but completely sober. Otherwise it's pointless, really, right? It's just going to show up and show up and show up. And so that was really when I came to my knees, and it was just like, you don't have a choice. And so I flew home with my mom and my daughter the next day. And I drank the whole way home. My dad died in a plane crash. There's some stuff that I maybe hadn't dealt with, or maybe still haven't dealt with. I don't know, around flying. I fly all the time, but I was terrified on that flight home, where I just wanted to go to sleep. And so was trying to drink myself to make myself pass out. And I didn't. I watched that map, the whole flight from London to Calgary, and I'd be like, okay, we're over water now. If we crash, we're not okay. If we're over land, and it was just this anxiety intensified and intensified. And I was trying to drown it out with alcohol. And so on that flight, or maybe it was before the flight, I know on New Year's Day, I was like, I'm done. I need, like, this has to go. But then I drank on the flight to help make myself pass out, which the flight was on January 4th. And so I knew that when I got back on the soils of Canada, alcohol was no more, and that I didn't have a choice. Like, the goddess was really like, you can stay with it in your life, but it was almost like, there was a moment where it's like, it's not going to be good. Like, you're going to hurt yourself. If you stay down this path, you're going to go hard, and I think, when we're consumed with substance, we're really seeking something outside of ourselves, maybe a mystical, maybe a spiritual experience, and thinking that the alcohol or drugs are going to take us there. But that can be very harmful to us. And so the yogic path, or the spiritual path, is seeking that spiritual mysticism within. So a completely different experience, but it can take us to the same space, And so the goddess brought me to my knees. It's either stay on this path and, death is kind of following you there, or choose to let it go. And so I chose to let it go, but I couldn't commit to not drinking forever. That felt way too big. And I'd done that and failed over and over and over again. And so I wanted to kind of set myself up for success. And so I decided to quit drinking for a year. And that felt like enough time to just see what happened. You know, it was like I can commit to a year. And so January 5th, I committed to the year. And what took place in that year was wild. It was the deepest growth I've ever experienced. It was freedom. And it was me finding what I'd actually been searching for with the substances, you know, that freedom that I wanted or tasted for the briefest moment when I was drunk. That started to happen in that year of sobriety. And I always, talk about it like there was a ball of cement in my womb space or in my gut. And what that first year of sobriety looked like was me unraveling that ball in my gut, where it was like, I don't have to feel like, oh, when am I going to get the text like you did this or you did that or you're this or you're that, or, the ball dropping. I was always waiting for the ball to drop or the next bad thing. And that year was like that ball started to unravel. And, that was 6 years ago. And so I'm still on the path. Oh, we're always on our healing journeys. And it's really been that ball dismantling and dismantling and dismantling where I feel ease and peace and freedom almost all the time. Not saying I don't go through heaviness, but that's what the first year really felt like. And it's been such a teacher and my greatest gift. It was the second best decision that I've ever made in my life. The first being, having my daughter, because it has allowed me to actually experience this human experience, right? When we're consumed with the substance, we're not really here. And fully being here isn't all unicorns and rainbows. It's not all love and light. Like, it is being with all of it, with all the facets of this human experience. And so what sobriety allowed was, going back to my teenage years when I was in this internal hell and felt like somebody, please rescue me for the love of God. I had to actually go into that internal hell, which was terrifying and uncomfortable. And I remember probably being like 2 months into my sobriety and just sitting on my bed and just sobbing and crying, and I didn't know how to deal with it. It's like a newborn baby, or not a newborn baby, but like, first learning how to walk. I had to learn how to walk sober because it was like, this is what I'm feeling. I've never dealt with this. I've always just repressed it. However that wanted to look, I actually have to deal with it. I have no choice, and so it's like figuring out who I was beneath the alcohol, and reforming my foundation, because I didn't have a stable foundation, because that's why the alcohol came in, right? It was to mask this, these beliefs and truths that I had decided at a young age. And so I had to dismantle all of that. And, when life gets real, when hardship comes in, when challenges come in, my go-to was to drink, and that wasn't an option anymore. And so it really became where I had to go in to get out. And I want to be really, compassionate or really real in the fact that that's not easy. That is not easy on a planet that is conditioned for us to stay numb. There's so many different numbing mechanisms: drugs, alcohol, consumerism, porn, social media. They're all designed to take us away from what is actually going on. But when we actually be with what is actually going on, our truth resides beneath that. Who we actually are resides beneath that. And meeting ourselves and seeing ourselves, that can be terrifying. And, so that first year I lost friends. People left my life, but there were also people that really supported me and continue to support me and love me and meet me exactly where I am. So there was deaths that took place. There was deaths of old versions of me that took place, and, people falling away. It wasn't easy, but it was my only option. The other option wasn't available anymore because I had finally met my purpose and my mission on earth. I knew what I came here to do. I'd left the design industry by that time, or I was still in it very, very little. I was still in it just minimally for that first year, but really building my career outside of that, of like life coaching and teaching yoga. And so I had met my soul's purpose, my mission, my truth, and I could follow that, but alcohol could not be a part of it. It was like, I can't do the work that I showed up on this planet to do if alcohol is a part of it. And so that conviction and dedication to that I really threw myself into. It was like alcohol wasn't an option because I knew where that was going to take me. And that looked like death, and a life of pain and sorrow and just not truth. And so the first year, yeah, many people fell away. That was painful, but it was really me diving in to who I actually was and the freedom that I was actually seeking. And so, fast forwarding 6 years, what has sobriety really looked like? And, for me, it's looked like being with every part of this human experience. We're in an interesting time on this planet. We've been experiencing COVID for the past almost 2 years now, I think it is. And so this has really brought us to our knees in some ways, and to sit with it head on, without any coping mechanisms, can feel, like a lot, definitely like a lot. But the alternative, in my experience is, that internal hell that I was going through as a teenager, it followed me all the way through my life until I actually dealt with it. And so alcohol, substance, whatever, it keeps you separate from actually dealing with what's going on. And it will keep showing up until you deal with it, right? The traumas, the experiences, the guilt, the shame, it's going to follow you until you actually go in. And so, COVID has felt very intense, without a coping mechanism, but I've also had my spiritual practices, which have been my saving grace ever since I became sober, and have, deepened my connection to source, to creator, to goddess. And so I feel very supported on this path, and me dealing with the experiences that have come up head on through COVID or through heartbreak or the dark nights of the soul, because we have those even as we continue on our path, has allowed me to be with it when it shows up, as opposed to it coming back, years and years down the road. It's dealing with it head on. And that's really what sobriety is in my, journey with it. And when we deal with the things head on, when we go into the depths of darkness, when we sit with the pain, when we sit with the discomfort, freedom and liberation always meets us on the other side. And discomfort, being sober, can be extremely uncomfortable. All of my fears that I had been masking with alcohol have come to the surface. And so, I'm very awkward in social situations. If there's a large group of people, I'm very quiet. I, feel a little bit overwhelmed by everybody's energy. I had to accept myself. I had to accept that part of me and recognize like, that's why I would get really drunk, is because I felt really uncomfortable in social situations. And so, now being sober, being in those situations where there's a lot of people or a lot of energy, I know how to support myself in that, and I can accept myself in that, right? Like, sobriety is really accepting all of the parts that you might have drowned out, or that I did drown out with the alcohol. And so, with fully accepting ourselves, that is freedom and liberation, with fully going into the pieces or the experiences of the traumas, that is freedom and liberation. And so, this sober life feels easeful, flowing most of the time. And then when this stuff comes up, because it does, where, this earth is a mystery school. It's we experience so many lessons in life. It's leaning into it and going into the discomfort and really learning to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And what meets you in discomfort is growth, right? It's leaning outside the comfort zone. It's beautiful, but can feel terrifying. But it's also that excitement and like that vitality and aliveness that we seek, that we think we're getting through the substance. And so, my wisdom that I have cultivated in these past 6 years of sobriety is just everything that I wanted the alcohol to give me was on the other side of letting it go. And it's so beautiful and potent and terrifying and takes such a leap of faith. But if you're, curious of the path and where it can take you, just know that you're fully meeting yourself on the other side. And that that is fully living this human experience, in my opinion, right? We came here to fully live and thrive and experience. And that is what is on the other side of sobriety. And it's not always pretty. It's definitely not always pretty, but it's life. And what a beautiful journey to fully experience this life. And so, yeah, I hope that, wherever you're at on your path, if you're curious, if you're sober, if it's time to give up the alcohol, that you can just meet yourself in that and really honor yourself, and maybe take the leap, and that you will meet the creator, the divine God, goddess on this path, and that you're so supported and loved on it. Thank you so much for joining me for an episode of the Phoenix Rising podcast. Please like, share, download, subscribe if you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next week for another episode on the Phoenix Rising podcast. Sending so much love.